Hey, I'm Dr. Nate Bosch of the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams, and today we're going to talk about cyanobacteria, also known as blue-green algae. Why do we see blue-green algae in certain lakes and not in others? Why do we see it at certain times of the day and not at other times of the day? Why do the toxins that these algae can produce show up in certain lakes but not others, or at certain times but not other times? Toxins are important to consider because they can be harmful to people and pets who use these lakes. And these are questions that are talked about and wondered about all around the world, not just northern Indiana or even just in the Midwestern United States. So let's dive into some of those questions. First thing that we need to understand when we think about these algae is they have a competitive advantage over other algae in that they can vertically migrate up and down in the water column of a lake. So as they do photosynthesis, like all plants do, they're producing carbohydrates. The simplest form is glucose. And as they accumulate more carbohydrates in their cells, they start to get heavier. And so they start to sink down lower in the water column, away from the surface and down towards the bottom of a lake. They also have gas vesicles, which can increase buoyancy. So as they have more gas in those vesicles, they can increase buoyancy, move up towards the surface. So these algae, unlike a lot of other types of algae, can actually control where they are in the water column. So they can be up near the surface when they want to get sunlight and do photosynthesis. They can be down near the bottom of the lake where there's higher nutrient levels like nitrogen and phosphorus, and they can pull in those nutrients and be able to grow quite prolifically. That's called luxury uptake. They can take more nutrient on than they actually need in order to come back to the surface and grow a lot more aggressively than some of the other types of algae that they're competing with in a lake. So this vertical migration is a real competitive advantage then to blue-green algae, and is one of the reasons why we see it in some of our lakes, and sometimes it can bloom, which means we've got a whole lot of it all at one time. So why in some lakes and not in others? This has been a question that we've noticed and have been trying to solve here locally as well. We have some lakes which has high amounts of algae populations, and so we can look at chemistry of the water and the temperature of the water, the conditions maybe of the wind, and try to predict when we see that. And we have other lakes which, despite the high population of the cyanobacteria, we have really low toxin production. In other cases, we have lakes with high toxin production, but yet low algal populations. How can that be, right? Well, these blue-green algae can regulate in some instances how much toxin they produce. It's somewhat what we're trying to figure out right now, different chemical cues. Maybe it's competition with other algae. Maybe it's certain genetic strains of these blue-green algae that lend themselves more to producing toxins than others around them. These are active research questions that we're working on right now. For instance, Lake Wawasee, which is our largest natural lake here in Indiana, has a little bit more toxin than we would expect given the relatively low population of algae that we often see in that lake. So as we've tracked that over time, a few years back, we started adding more sampling locations around the lake to try to get a better sense of how is this algae moving around the lake potentially? Well, do we have higher toxins in certain parts of the lake? And we noticed typically in the southeastern part of the lake, we had the more elevated toxin levels. Well, we go sampling once a week, right? Well, what happens during the other times of the week that we're not there sampling? So we talked to our Department of Engineering here at Grace College, and the students and faculty there developed a buoy for us where we could have a sensor using fluorescence to be able to monitor how much blue-green algae is there at certain times, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, more than the weekly sampling that we were doing. But an interesting thing happened. We would see the algae, and then the algae would disappear. As we looked back at that data every hour of the day, all 7 days of the week. Remember, blue-green algae can vertically migrate up and down in the water column. So at certain times of the day, when the blue-green algae was right around where that sensor was, we would see it in our data. Other times, if it moved closer to the surface or down near the bottom, we wouldn't see that blue-green algae in our data. So we went back to the Department of Engineering and came up with a design for the Buoy 2.0, if you will. And those of you who are typically listening to us on the podcast, this might be a good opportunity for you to switch over and watch us on YouTube as I'm showing a model of this buoy, but I'll describe it to you as well if you're listening. So this buoy, I've got a small model of it here in my hand. The actual version of it is 6.9 feet tall, so taller than I am standing here today. And it's got a large vertical shaft down underneath it that helps create stability when it's in the water. It has a sensor that can move through that shaft and out the bottom. It's got some solar panels on the top to produce electricity. There's a battery inside. There's a motor which can move that sensor up and down in the water column. There's flotation here around the middle section, some splash guards. I've got an aquarium here that I'm plopping this in just so you can kind of see how it works. That stability arm down on the bottom there helps hold it vertical in the water. You can imagine on a lake like Lake Wawasee, which is where this has been deployed, our biggest natural lake here in Indiana. As I said, lots of wave action from boats, but also just from the wind itself. And so having that stability is going to be really important. Waterproof housing around it. And this works really well. So we tested it out a little bit, and we intend to deploy it for the full summers coming up here over the next few years. So what are some things that you can do yourself to help learn more about this type of algae, the blue-green algae, and protect you and your family? Well, I'd encourage you, if you're in Kosciuszko County here in northern Indiana, to go and sign up for our algae notification system. That comes out every Friday to keep you and your family, your pets safe for the weekend, in time for the weekend. If you don't live in our area here of northern Indiana, you can go and see our expert guide to blue-green algae, which is on our website. Both of those things available at lakes.grace.edu. So, as we continue to do this research, we'll continue to keep folks updated on how they can keep their people and their pets safe. And what we hope this research will eventually lead to is prediction and then prevention of these algae toxins in the first place.